Most of you, especially if you haven't given birth yourself yet, are carrying around other people's birth stories. If you have to be told when it's time to push, it's not time to push. The way we view birth is cultural. Your view of birth is going to be radically shaped by the media, by the stories that the women tell around us. In our culture today, I see a lot of fear. I had 3 home births, all natural, no drugs. I got so happy when I realized everything I'd been praying for is happening. It doesn't hurt. In fact, I'm actually having fun. And then I was like, wait, women don't have fun in labor. That's not real. That's not who has fun in labor? And I'm like, no, it's real.
You wouldn't wait to learn CPR until you need it. You wouldn't wait to learn how to swim until you were already in the pool. Yet when it comes to birth, we often wait until we're already pregnant to begin to learn about this journey. Unfortunately, this can leave many women susceptible to horror stories they've heard, or the way that birth is perceived in movies. Which, spoiler alert, is hardly ever physically or emotionally accurate. What if instead we learned about this beautiful process before we became pregnant? You may even be single watching this, but I think that's actually great timing to learn about your body and what it is capable of. If you're not new around here at the Dear Future Husband podcast, we've heard the stigma of the 50% divorce rate, and we are keen on dismantling that by creating stronger marriages now, even as stronger individuals. But that same drastic 50% percentage carries over into birth, with 1 in 2 women being scared to have children. Call me crazy, but I do believe that God is bigger than circumstances. He's bigger than the narratives we've heard, and that He can show us how to have healthy relationships, lasting marriages, and beautiful births. My guest today is of the same mind. Her name is Karen Welton, better known at the handle on Instagram as Pain-Free Birth. I remember when I first found her account when I was pregnant with my first baby and thinking, what? I've never heard that it's possible to have a pain-free birth. I've hardly even heard that it's possible to have a good, beautiful birth. I'm now pregnant with my second baby, but during my first pregnancy, I learned so much and even unlearned a lot of things that I'd picked up along the way about what I could do during birth, what some of the best and worst practices were, and how to, again, have a birth that is not ridden with pain, that is not just wreaking havoc, but can actually be redemptive and beautiful. And what I've found with friends that have become recently pregnant, or even some of you that are pre-married and think, hey, I already know that I'm nervous about having kids, but I believe it's something God's destined for me. Can you help me sort through this? I've realized that we are misguided, sometimes uneducated, and oftentimes scared of the unknowns within birth. This has even led a lot of women to think, do I even want kids? Or couples to delay this process simply because they're unsure of what to expect or if they can do it. What I hope to achieve today in this conversation is to pull back the layer on what is this process like? What can I expect when I get pregnant? What can I do to help have a better birth for me and for my baby? What are some practices that we do here that might actually be conflicting with that? And allow for our innate abilities and our faith in God to really lead us down a road we might not have thought possible when it came to childbearing. Scripture that beautifully paints what I hope you're imparted with today is Psalm 34, 4-5. It says, I sought the Lord, and He answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to Him are radiant, and their faces shall never be ashamed. You may have already had kids, never had kids, wondering if and when you will get the chance to. Whatever camp you're in, I hope that you find some resources and some practical and empowering advice that can help you in the coming or near future. Karen Welton, welcome to the Dear Future Husband podcast. And you're a childbirth doula, you're an educator, a coach, but I feel like what I need to say to set you up well is your bio from your Instagram, because that's what drew me to you. Like, yes, I need to follow this woman, I need to learn. Your bio says, I coach pregnant women to have pain-free, you heard that right, ladies, pain-free, ecstatic births with God. I just want to say amen to that, and even the single women that are like, I'm not even thinking about birth, or I didn't think that was possible. It is, and you share on that so much. So thank you for what you share and the passion you bring to this conversation and the hope. The hope, let alone.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So we have single women, dating women that are on this page that come to the podcast, but I really do think that this is something we don't talk about until you're pregnant. And then you've probably already picked your provider, already have heard so many different birth stories, good or bad. And so I think it's helpful to have these conversations even before you're dating someone, because it really can shape your mindset on, do I want children? When do I want children? Can I do this? What have you seen actually just with single women that have talked to you? Or your own daughters, because you have 3 girls.
I do. I have 3 girls. They're a little young still, but they come to me and say, oh, I want to be a mommy. I'm going to have a baby, or sometimes they'll say, I don't want to have any babies. And it changes every day. They're 5, 8, and 11. But I'm definitely working towards infusing a positive view toward childbirth with them. And I just talk about it casually. Like, yeah, you were in mommy's belly. My 5-year-old was asking me this last night. Like, where did I come out? Out of your vagina? And I said, yes, that's exactly where you came out. And she goes, ew, gross. And I'm like, it's not gross. It's beautiful. Yeah, you asked about single women and what I'm seeing. And I think generally speaking in our culture today, I see a lot of fear. And that really was the motivation for me for starting pain-free birth. Because when I got pregnant with my first daughter, that was 11 years ago now, I was really scared. And I realized I hadn't really thought a lot about childbirth except for the movies I'd seen that portrayed it in this really scary, traumatic way, or friends that had had babies before me who said, oh my gosh, it's like the most painful thing you'll ever experience. Or the story of my own birth that my mom told me growing up it was so excruciatingly painful, and I had back labor and it took forever. And so I realized I'm carrying these narratives about birth subconsciously with me. Mm-hmm. And I knew there was something in my spirit that just didn't line up with this, who I knew God to be as a good father who created my body and created it brilliantly. And I said, there has to be another way. And all I'm seeing and all I'm hearing is fear. And I think that's what women are facing now, especially single women or married women who are considering children. So I think it grieves my heart, and I'm sad because in many cases women say, I don't even want to have kids because I'm so scared of the pain of childbirth, or yeah, I'm just going to elect for a cesarean, or I'm just going to do whatever the doctor says. And there's this trend, I'm sure you've noticed this too, of women who are getting married later, having children mm-hmm. later. And then the fear of childbirth is also, I believe, like prolonging that plan of God's plan, that we have family, that we grow, that we build, that we multiply. And when we approach childbirth, this thing that God gave us as a beautiful blessing, with so much fear, because that's all we've been conditioned to believe about it, it steals and robs from us. And so one of my biggest passions is to shift the mindset of how we view birth in this world. And that's my goal, is that I want to change the culture of birth so that women are no longer scared of birth, but they're excited and confident to give birth.
Yes, which is so possible, and thank you for setting out to do that. And I think a lot of the fear, especially with the people that are not yet pursuing fertility or pregnancy, it is that, what you're saying, subconscious or suppressed fear, where they don't actually know about it. But I was doing some research because I was curious. I was like, well, how many women are scared? Like, is this going to be a relevant conversation? And worldwide, it's about 15 to 20% of women are scared, which is still a big number. But it said in the U.S., roughly 50% of women are scared to give birth. And you know this. I'd love for you to shed some light on this. Fear is not even just like, oh, I can't do it, but it's actually conflicts with the hormones that are needed for birth. Can you share more on that from the basis of someone that's like, I know nothing about the hormones in birth. Why is being scared that bad?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And I think, to your point, that's interesting. The statistics you mentioned, I would even, in my experience, I think it's even higher than that, especially in the Western culture or in America. And what I've found in my study I've been a doula now for 11 years, and I've found that the way we view birth is cultural. And if we grew up in a Western culture, an American culture, or maybe European, depending on where you grew up and what the culture informed you of, your view of birth is going to be radically shaped by those experiences, by the media, by the stories that the women tell around us, and by what's passed to us. And we create this worldview, this narrative of childbirth. But if you were to grow up, say, in Japan or in like a Latin American country, women there don't fear birth the way we do here. To them, it's just a very natural thing. We are not scared. I've done studies on this and found like it's really fascinating to see that whatever you believe about birth, the statistics and the outcomes follow those beliefs. So if you're scared of birth, if you think I'm going to need the pain medicine, I'm going to need the epidural, or I'm going to have complications, statistically, you're more likely to need them. But if you walk into it like, oh, it's just a natural thing women do, it's hard, why would I be afraid of it? It's just something we do. Then the rates of pain management, of cesarean, of needing intervention are dramatically less. And you can study this across cultures. So I think it's fascinating how powerful our mindset is when we go into birth. And the work I do with women is to reframe our entire mindset. And the reason that mindset and our perception of birth is so important, and like you said, so much of it is subconscious. So we don't even know what we're carrying with us. And so I like to say, like, what's in your bag? I'll ask women this, like, what are your fears of birth? And oftentimes it feels like this insurmountable fear. Like, I could never do that. How could a 8-pound baby fit out of my body? And it's just crazy to think about, right? Like, if you haven't actually given birth yet, most of us don't actually stop to think about like what are the biomechanics of how does this even work? I know I was like, what? How does this like? I can't even imagine that like a human coming out of my body. And because we don't see birth, and it's not in our culture, it's censored primarily. But if you rewind 100 plus years ago, we grew up with women. We saw our mothers and our sisters and our friends giving birth. We saw them breastfeeding. We saw them nurturing their young. We lived in communities. And that in our modern day society is largely lost. We live much more siloed in society now as mothers. And I think mothers are suffering because of it. There's much higher rates of postpartum mental health issues. That's another topic for another day. But getting back to your question on the hormones, the perspective we carry into birth is so important because birth is guided by our hormonal physiology. And the hormones we have running through our body in labor will determine how we experience those contractions. And so if we have adrenaline and cortisol in our bodies due to fear or anxiety or concern, or even just feeling uncomfortable or unsafe, like I just can't fully relax in this environment, or I just keep thinking like, what if this takes too long? Or like, this is going to hurt, the contraction's coming and I have to brace for it. All of those thoughts are releasing hormones in our body. It's releasing adrenaline and cortisol. And what that does is it creates tension in our bodies. I call it the fear, tension, pain cycle. And so as soon as we have any fear, tension, anxiety, and it could be the most subtle fear, it doesn't have to be like a terror. Like women will say to me, oh, I wasn't scared. And I was like, well, were you fully, completely safe and surrendered? Right? Like, were you surrendered to the point and feeling safe enough and loved enough and cared for enough that was an environment that was even intimate, like a place where you could have sex? That's the level of safety women need in childbirth. And when we go to a hospital, or even no matter where you're birthing, when we have this conflict in us, it's like more of a tension and dis-ease in our body. Even those subtle changes in physiology and hormones and mindset shift will release a different set of hormones. And so when we're in a state of dis-ease or fear or anxiety, we're releasing adrenaline and cortisol, which causes tension in our body. That tension in our body creates pain when we start to have contractions. And then when we have that, we experience that pain, our brain goes, uh-oh, this is bad. This is hurting me. I don't like this. I got to get away from it, right? We have this survival instinct that wants to run away from pain. It's that fight or flight or freeze or fawn response. And that's just ingrained in us. So when our perception toward our contractions that our body is producing involuntarily is, ow, this is hurting me, this is bad, it's to run away. And what that does is it creates more tension and more fear in our body. So then the next contraction comes and the tension has built, and then it creates more pain, and then it creates more fear, more tension, more pain. And it's this downward spiral into this, oh my gosh, labor is excruciating. I need the drugs, hook me up. Or we're just bracing, trying to suffer and bear through it. And this is the normal kind of story for many women, for almost any labor you'll find in modern day America, women going to hospitals who haven't done this, who don't understand that there is another way. And I teach that there is another way. If we can release the positive birth hormones, which is oxytocin, serotonin, you can go down two different paths. And what women don't understand is it's either or. You can't have fear and tension in your body and release cortisol and adrenaline and have surges of oxytocin, because adrenaline counteracts oxytocin. If we're having stress hormones in our body, it tells our brain, stop producing oxytocin. And oxytocin is what produces contractions. It also blocks pain receptors in our body. So when we have a surge of oxytocin flooding our body, and oxytocin, for those of you who don't know, is the love hormone. It's the hormone you get when you hug someone, when you embrace someone. It's the hormone you get during sex, when you climax. It's the human connection hormone. It's also the hormone that is largely responsible for uterine contractions, and it blocks those pain receptors on the uterus so that your body can actually contract and stretch and open and work really, really hard. Like your body can have really strong contractions, but your brain won't receive the pain signal when you have a high level of oxytocin and endorphins, especially endorphins. They actually attach to the pain receptors and they block the pain signal. And we don't understand that we have so much power with our minds in how to release the positive birth hormones, and that can actually block pain and create strong labor contractions that help labor move along really quickly and fast. So, but to get there, you have to be conscious of it. You have to know, like, here's my thoughts, here's what I'm thinking, here's how this is the result it produces, and have so much self-awareness that this concept that like labor just happens to you, like it's a lightning bolt and you just have to suffer through it, is not an accurate perspective. But that's the perspective many women take. And what I teach is that you actually have so much control over the hormones you're releasing, the emotions in your heart, and the thoughts going through your mind. And when we renew our mind, as the Bible says, it changes everything. So God told us throughout Scripture, do not fear. And how applicable is that to childbirth? How applicable is that when we can control our mindset and know that this is good and God created and designed this whole process for me, not for me to suffer?
That's so good. I will confirm what you're saying. Of the 2 times I remember my first labor that I felt the least amount of pain was the first moment was when I was actually struggling. I kind of got stuck at 6 centimeters, and you'll appreciate this is because like the sun was coming up and I wasn't where I thought I was going to be. So, like that fear kind of kicked in, or the frustration of I was like, my baby was supposed to be here. It was supposed to be like,
isn't
like,
that
what's
so
going
interesting? It's that, right? It's the mindset. Oh, I'm not where I'm supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. And that's what got me stuck. But then I saw, and initially I was like, I can't do this. And I started saying all the things we start to believe. And I just looked over at my husband, who the girls that follow the podcast will know, 6'3", like stoic, like he's like a man's man. And I look over and he is visibly emotional watching me go through this. And instantly all the pain I felt just kind of evaporated from my body, because I thought, man, this man loves me so much. He's moved watching me go through this. And so it's almost like I had this out of body experience where I was like, oh, this is hard oh my gosh, he loves me. And I just forgot about all the pain receptors that I was feeling in the moment. And then the second moment was actually when I was pushing, because I was like, oh, I get to meet my baby. So if anyone's like, that's hogwash, it's just hormones, how can I really do that? No, it's so real. Like, whenever my love tank was filled up, I can't even tell you in seconds the amount of difference I felt within my body. So I'm so glad you share that. I know people, there's so much further they can go to how to actually turn those on, and you teach on that. I want to talk about the idea of pain-free, which your handle on Instagram is pain-free birth. And I remember when I found your page, I geeked out. I was like, I can have a pain-free birth. This is amazing. Because initially I thought, I'm going to get an epidural. I'm going to go to hospital. Like, give me whatever, because I'm just this little petite woman. My body can't handle this. And God really challenged me. And he's like, no, you're going to have I want to say natural, but an intervention-free birth. And I was like, are we sure about that? Like, why are you mad at me? What did I do? He's like, no, this is possible. So I found your page and I shared it with my sister-in-law, Julie, who was phenomenal through my birth. And she even looked at it because she has 4 of her own. And she was like, what do you mean pain-free birth? Like, can I check out her page? And then she looked at your teachings more and she's like, oh, yes, she's right on it. So what would you say to these women that are hearing this for the first time? This is all news. How do we actually have pain-free births? Whether you're a first-time mom, third-time mom.
Absolutely. I love it. I mean, this is my bread and butter, as you know, and I named my account that on purpose. It was intentional because I knew it would shock and even offend people at times. And Jesus offended people to make a point sometimes. Not that I'm trying to offend, but I really felt like this was like the hill I was willing to die on, in a sense, because I'd heard stories when I was pregnant and with my first, and I really prayed and prepared and found resources. And I said, you know what? There has to be a better way. I don't believe that God would create my body to be defective, to have to suffer. Just automatically you have to suffer because of the curse, because Eve sinned, whatever the theological or biological reasons are that we believe that, we just say it in culture like it's a fact. Childbirth has to be painful. And we never actually question it. We never actually step back and go, but why? Is that true? Is that really true? And I'm the girl who's going to question things. I'm the girl who's like, wait a second, explain this to me. Why is that true? So I went on this quest of like discovering, does childbirth have to be painful? And if there's a way to do it without pain, I'm going to figure it out. I'm the girl who doesn't want to have a painful birth. I'm the girl who's never been hospitalized, never broken a bone. And I was partially like, I just don't want to experience this pain. So I'm selfishly going to figure out the shortcut. I'm going to hack the system. If there is a way, I will find it. And so I went on like a hunt of like, okay, let me find the births. I found some, books written a long time ago, like Supernatural Childbirth by Jackie Mize. Yeah, Ina May definitely came into play there. And first I learned about the spiritual, the how faith can produce a pain-free birth with supernatural childbirth, and read these stories of women who had pain-free births. And I was like, okay, it's possible. But you know what, God, I really need to meet someone like my age, because the babies being born in this book are like my age now. Like they're like 30 years old. So I'm like, okay, is this still happening today? Sometimes you just need a little more evidence. And I'm sure God was laughing at me throughout this journey. Like, okay, sister, here you go. Whatever you need, I'll provide it. But it was really this quest. And then I met a girlfriend who said, yeah, I had a pain-free birth with my second. I was like, okay, it's possible. Then I'd show up at a home group, like a home birth circle, and a woman told me her story of a pain-free birth. And I was like, it just lined up. It was like evidence after evidence. And I'm stacking these stories. And what I'm actually doing is rewiring my brain, because what I have are stories that I've stacked of the evidence of how painful birth is and how hard it is and how difficult and traumatic it is. And I intentionally began to remove those stories from my consciousness, put them aside, take them out of my bag, and replace them with these positive, supernatural, pain-free birth stories. Because I said, if God can do it for you, he can do it for me. Then I started learning about the physiology of childbirth, which is all about the hormones that I explained earlier. The fear, tension, pain cycle, the power of oxytocin in our bodies to block pain. And not just block pain and not just create strong contractions, but actually make birth euphoric and ecstatic. Because when we have all of these endorphins in our body, it is like a drug high. And they've done studies and found that it's actually like the equivalent 50 times stronger than if you were to take cocaine, the amount of endorphins that natural childbirth releases in your brain. And I tell women, like, your brain is the best pharmacy ever. Like, the drugs your brain releases naturally under childbirth will surpass any other life experience you have. And this is something men will never experience because they will never give birth. Right. And so this is an honor. This is a privilege. It's a blessing when we can really understand how good birth can be. And so the first thing I would say is, like, how can you have a pain-free birth is, number one, you have to entertain the idea that it is possible. And if that has not been your experience, if you had a horribly painful birth and all the women in your life have told you how horrible and painful birth is, perhaps just consider that it might be possible to do it a different way. It might be possible that another kind of experience could exist that maybe you just haven't encountered yet. And so that's where a lot of women start when they come to me. It's first like a little bit of shock, a little bit of like, I don't know if I believe that, lots of skepticism. And I totally understand that. And then they start following me. They start hearing the stories. They start hearing the stories of the women who take my course or who follow for a while. And it starts, they get it. It shifts something in our consciousness that says, oh, this is what I believed before. And now I'm entertaining that it's possible. And now I'm starting to learn about the physiology and how I can actually have a pain-free birth. And how the hormones work, and how powerful I really am as a woman to walk into labor and experience this. And then we begin to embrace not just the contractions, but the whole experience. We embrace motherhood. We embrace what is this whole transition, and we take it on as like this sacred rite of passage, which is what I believe it is that childbirth is a sacred spiritual rite of passage for women. And when we don't resist it, and we actually step into it and embrace this high calling of motherhood, a lot of that fear goes away. A lot of that fight, the resistance in us dies. That the maiden in us dies that wants to be in control, that wants to have everything perfect and right. And we say, okay, I surrender. And there's so much about birth that is about surrender. And those hormones that come in, man, it's just, it'll blow your mind when you really understand, like, the way that God designed birth is meticulous and perfect. And it's like he thought of everything. And that's what I geek out about now so much, because it's like, if we only knew, I believe I only know the tip of the iceberg, but the design itself is so incredible when we partner with our bodies and what our bodies are doing. And we have a view that just says, like, God, like, I'm capable. Like, he created me for this. And the more I lean into it and I release this joy, this, and I'm thankful and I'm grateful for every surge, and I'm in awe of my body and the way it's created. And I can feel the release. I can feel the joy, the endorphins, the love, the oxytocin. I'm one with my body. I'm not resisting and running away. Everything starts to gel. And we actually tap into what I call the relaxation oxytocin bliss cycle. Because you can go down the fear, tension, pain cycle, or you can like elevate into this relaxation, oxytocin, bliss cycle. And it's all about what hormones are you releasing? Where is your mindset focused? And that's going to determine how you experience a contraction. And so when I say pain-free birth, I don't mean like you're numb and you have an epidural and you don't feel anything. And I think that's sometimes the perception that's like, wait a second, that's not possible. Pain-free birth isn't possible. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm not saying you don't feel anything. I'm saying you feel everything. When I had my labors, I had 3 home births, all natural, no drugs. And I felt everything. It was intense. It was strong. Mm-hmm. It was pressure. It was full body, sometimes contractions so strong that they sometimes took my breath away. But I learned how to manage and breathe and sink into it in early labor when they were initially very painful. And I realized I am not embracing them. And God actually spoke to me early on in my first labor when I was writhing, trying to get away from the pain. It was very painful. It was like, God, this is not what we planned for. This is not pain-free birth. I had a little come to Jesus moment, because I knew this is still early labor.
I'm not the only one.
No, yes, every labor there's a couple come to Jesus moments. 100%, and that was mine. I was like, God, tell me what to do. He's like, embrace it, and I was like, I don't want it. It hurts, but okay, I won't argue, God. The next one's coming in about 30 seconds. I'll just give it a try. What do I have to lose, right? So I just focused all my energy on embracing and welcoming this surge, this contraction into my body, and it built, and then it went away, and it didn't hurt. It wasn't painful. Like, massive shift, 180-degree shift from, 2 minutes before the contraction that was very painful to now this one. In fact, I thought it was a false contraction. I was like, that must have been like a little blip, the little fake ones. I'll try it on the next one. Well, that next one didn't hurt either. I'm like, wait a second. Like, I felt all the tightening. It took an immense amount of concentration initially in those early stages to like really sink in and relax all my muscles and welcome it in. But the next one didn't hurt, and the next one didn't hurt, and the next one didn't hurt, to the point that I'm like, at 7-8 centimeters, I get checked, and I'm thinking like, maybe it'll get worse later, but I'm having fun. This seems like it's working. I feel like I'm really in labor. Like, your brain will tell you like, oh, it's not real labor yet, honey. The real thing's coming later. And then my midwife checked me. It's like, you're 7-8 centimeters. I was like, oh, this is real. This is happening. And what I didn't realize until later was that realization gave me another surge of oxytocin and more endorphins, because I got so happy when I realized everything I'd been praying for is happening. It doesn't hurt. In fact, I'm actually having fun. I'm in active labor, headed into transition, and this is fun. And then I was like, wait, women don't have fun in labor. Like, my conditioning kicked in, and it was like, no, that's not real. That's not who has fun in labor? And I'm like, no, it's real. I'm going to say it out loud. I'm going to actually say this. I'm having fun. And I blurted it out. Got even more endorphins, even more oxytocin. I didn't even realize what I was doing at the time, but I was like tripping more oxytocin, getting more doses of it in my body, all natural. Like, your brain, when you start to align with that mindset, with that hope, with that joy, with that excitement, with that, all of that, it creates these surges of endorphins. And so I'm feeling everything. I'm feeling the surges, but it's like I was riding the waves, and it was like a challenge. Like, okay, another one's coming. I'm going to just sink in. I'm going to ride it. I'm going to move my hips. I'm going to sway. I'm going to let it be. I'm going to let it exist there and let it get really big without having to control it or fight it. So you feel everything, but it just doesn't hurt. It's not painful. And there's so much joy, and the peaks of what you can experience in birth. I don't even believe I experienced anywhere near like the peak, because I hear birth stories now of women who are pushing out 10, 11 pound babies, the fetal ejection reflex, no tearing, like they don't even push, their body just pushes it. They're on this endorphin high. And I get such a joy out of hearing like what is possible in birth. And it's so much more than we've been told. It's so much better than we've been told, women. It's incredible if you open yourself up to this possibility and let God show you what your body is capable of and what is possible in childbirth.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing a little glimpse of what that looks like. I think women are now getting like a visual of your birth story and how to actually put the pieces of the puzzle into play. Like you're saying, we're just scratching the surface, and it's like you do have to just understand this and believe for it. And I think the experience of it, and as you're saying, going through that journey and letting the rubber meet the road is the best way, especially to someone that is pregnant right now listening to this, like just knowing, okay, I'm gonna have to apply this. Like, I love that you're weaving faith into this and you make that part of your process, because it's one thing to know it, but like you're saying, what do we actually believe? What do we believe we're capable of? What do we believe that God's going to do through this? What do we believe this is our Eve curse, or it's our rite of passage and our gift? I think of the verse when we talk about Paul, and he says, I beat my body and I prepare. And I think there is this preparation mentally, as you're saying, of, okay, know these points, know how to train your mind. But there's also that physical element too. And I remember hitting what you're talking about, that stride of where your body takes over and your brain kind of takes a back seat. Yeah. And that is so incomprehensible almost until you're in it, and indescribable. I'm bringing Karen on because I don't know how to tell women to get to that spot. But I remember when I was at that 6 centimeter spot and stuck, and feeling defeated, feeling like, well, my body's done all it can do, and I'm at this point where it just can't, it can't outlast the process. Like the process is now more powerful than me. And my sister-in-law, who was my doula in the experience, went to my midwife, and she was like, she was doing so good. Like, what should we do for her? And the midwife said, she's doing great. And I was like, I'm not really doing so great right now. I'm not feeling too hot. But my sister-in-law was like, she's an athlete. Like, she's capable. What should she do? And the midwife said she just needs to align her body and like that surrender. And I was like, what? Like, I'm trying everything I can physically do. And so I love that you're sharing that there is this mental, the spiritual, and the physical element that really combines. And I'm putting words in your mouth, but this is how I'm hearing it. It's like there's this synergy that when it happens, it just kind of contradicts everything. And I do think in Western culture we hear, well, when you hit the pain, you have to numb it out. And the only way to numb it out is through drugs. And no shame to anyone that's had an epidural, especially if that's all you've been told, or maybe that's all you were offered in your birth. But you're saying there is a numbing that is actually even more powerful than a drug trip, than cocaine, that we can access as women when we believe that we are capable. What are some other physical ways that you would tell women to prepare, even now? Because you were saying this earlier, talking about oxytocin in sex and oxytocin in birth. When I was getting married, everyone's like, oh yeah, the first time is painful. And I'm like, why is that what we're hearing? Because I'm going to go into this beautiful experience. My body's going to clench up. Like I'm not going to be ready for this in the right way. And I think that also rings true in birth. So what would you tell women? Maybe they're about to get married and their first years of sex could actually prepare them for birth. Are there any correlations there or things they can be doing now to better prepare?
Oh, I love that question. And yes, absolutely. There's so many parallels between sex and birth. And if you think about it, it's really, birth is the culmination of the sex act. You don't get a baby without sex. And so generally speaking, unless you're doing IVF, but still, this is the natural rhythm of life. Like it is sex, and then you conceive, you grow a baby, you give birth, and the same hormone, oxytocin, guides both processes. And for women, if you're young and you're married and you're in this phase of like figuring out sex and orgasm and how that whole thing works, you can actually get I believe, like a good understanding of even hormonal physiology in childbirth based on how you orgasm. And what you'll find, and I think what you were describing is like as a young married woman are having sex for the first time, we say it's painful because we're trying to make it happen. We don't understand that the orgasm comes from surrender. And I remember as a really young married woman, I got married super young, I was 19. I didn't orgasm for 2 years because I didn't understand this hormonal physiology of orgasm and how I needed to feel safe. I needed to surrender. And it's like even if you feel it building and you feel those hormones surging and there's attraction and there's chemistry, if you try to control it in those final moments, that orgasm will be elusive. You won't get it if you're nervous, if you're feeling pressured, like, oh, I'm going to miss it, or it won't happen, or, oh, I'm uncomfortable, or I don't quite, whatever that thing is. And it could be 100 different reasons, but if we're in our heads, it's not going to work really well. Like how many of you, any woman could tell you this who's been sexually intimate, if we are in our heads, it's a lot harder to orgasm, to climax. Same is true for birth, because you need that surge of oxytocin that only comes when you're out of your head. And you can practice this. I would encourage like young married women, if you're, practicing pay attention to what's going on in your head. What thoughts are you thinking? What are you open or are you closed? What is your feminine energy doing? Are you leaning in? Are you surrendering? Are you letting go of control? Are you in your body and your heart, or are you in your head thinking about the kids or the dogs or the laundry, or how long is this going to take, right? Because it's the same idea in labor. You're sitting there going, this is taking too long. I'm only 6 centimeters and the sun's coming up. In my plan, I had my baby by now, right? Like, it's really the hormonal physiology of sex and birth are so close. It's almost the same process. And if you can figure out how to let go and surrender and really sink into your feminine and let go of control in order to feel totally safe, to allow that process to happen, to allow the masculine to take over and be in that space in your body where the hormones just peak and you're riding those waves, right? And even in an orgasm, you're getting these waves, these surges. The sensation is very pleasurable. And women in birth have actually talked about having orgasmic births. Why? Because it's the same, very similar hormonal physiology, and the baby is coming a lot, in many cases, triggering those same pleasure points. And if we're in a state of total relaxation and safety, it's not impossible to have an orgasmic birth as babies being born. Now, that wasn't my experience, but I certainly had euphoric, ecstatic feeling. And then I'd have a contraction and I'd be moaning and groaning, and it probably looked a lot like a normal labor, but inside I had so much joy. And I feel like we reach this point in birth where it's like you need, the rubber meets the road, and you either get in your head and you try to control it and you get scared of how strong and how powerful these contractions are, or you let go. And this is the surrender. I tell women, you're going to reach a point where your body is going to take over, and you have a choice. You either try to stay in control and stay in the driver's seat, just like we will try to control our orgasm or get in our head, or you let go and you surrender. And usually that's when we cry out and say, I need the epidural, because it's scary. It's scary to be that vulnerable. It's scary to be that surrendered. It's scary to fully let go and believe that your body's going to take you there. And oftentimes what happens is when we face that moment and we choose surrender, our body opens and our baby comes very shortly after that. And whatever we've been resisting that has been holding tension in our bodies, that has actually been keeping us stuck at 6 centimeters or 8 centimeters, or keeping that baby high, or whatever it is happening, your physical body is reflecting what's happening in your heart. So when you're stuck and stalled, what's going on in your physiology, in your hormones? What's going on in your thought process? Because as soon as you let go and surrender, the body opens. As soon as you let go and surrender in the bedroom, the body climaxes. It releases. We are meant as women to release. We receive and we release and surrender. So there's so many parallels to sex and birth. Yeah. I could geek out on that for days. It's so fun. But the hormones, the feminine nature of childbirth is to release and surrender. And that only happens in a place of complete safety.
That is so neat too, because even the hormones and the responses and even the roles of the man in sex is so different than the female. And so I think leaning into, what are we designed to do in both spheres? And I'll go out on a limb here, make another correlation to someone's like, I'm single, I don't even know what that's like. How do I prepare? I think it's the same for falling in love. Like, we want to control our relationship and the timeline, but when we surrender to God's plan and we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to fall for someone, I think it's, it's like the breadcrumbs of what comes next, and it's all preparatory. So I just want to encourage someone listening that's like, well, I'm single right now, or I'm dating. Just think of how much, and I think this is a beautiful part where we're going to weave faith into it more, of like how much we go through that are lessons that God can teach us when we're open to it, prepare us for everything else. Like even birth, I think, can prepare you for parenthood. It's like, okay, well, I can't control my kids, but I can love them. I can be in tune with them, So I'm hearing this same kind of pattern repeat from all these different stages, and actually bring us closer together. And you mentioned this earlier, birth especially used to be done in culture. You used to watch your sisters or your friends, and they teach you about this experience. And that's my heart too, even for this podcast. Do life together, especially as females, these things we don't talk about anywhere unless they're in the movies and it's completely skewed. Let's have this connection and testimony to grow together and better the experiences we're having. And so going to that, we've talked on a lot, and I know we could keep going for an hour. You share a lot of this on your page and in your courses, so we will be sure to link those at the end. But if someone's listening, they want to get pregnant or they just found out they're pregnant, what is the first thing or the first 2 or 3 things you would tell them to do? Because what I hear a lot of my friends say is, I got the pregnancy test, I went to a doctor, like, I just didn't know what to do. I'm only 5 weeks, but now they have me on a whole plan, or I'm thinking these things. What would you tell them to do when they first find out they're pregnant to help steer them on the right path?
Yeah, I mean, I would say congratulations. This is so exciting. And then I'd say, like, your body knows exactly what to do. And practice almost not doing anything. And this is kind of very counterintuitive, probably for many women. We either ignore it and kind of avoid the childbirth preparation, thinking, oh, I'm not going to think about that right now. I'm going to look, go figure out the baby registry and the baby showers and all the things I need to buy in order. And we get in this consumeristic mindset of like, and I got to pick, choose my doctor and then do all these tests. And it's all this do, check all the boxes, right? And that puts us in a very masculine energy. And everything in our culture is a masculine energy. The hospital system, the maternity care we receive in this country is very masculine. It's very emergency protocol based. It's focusing on numbers, test results, stats. How dilated are you? How long have you been in labor? How long has your water broken? How strong are your contractions? Are you GBS positive? It's stats, numbers, tests. And it can create a ton of anxiety for pregnant women who this process is actually designed to be this like this time, this sacred time. Pregnancy is a sacred time of going inward and connecting to God. And so the first thing I would tell you to do is to go into that intuitive state, the motherly intuition, which you spoke about, that you know what to do when you have kids. Well, guess what? You know what to do when you're pregnant, but usually society beats that intuition out of mothers. How? With fear. They layer fear on. Oh, this could happen. This could happen. Now you're high risk. Now you're this. Now you're that. You got to get tested for that. And da. Okay, great. Yeah, get prenatal care. Like, we want healthy, woman-centered. I encourage you to find a midwife and find a midwifery care I love, because the obstetric community does not understand the physiology and the spiritual needs women have in labor, for the most part. I know that's
even
a generalization.
The way to talk to them.
Yeah, they don't know. They don't even know how to support you in labor. There's interruptions. Everything in the hospital system and in obstetrics is so masculine focused, and men were not involved in childbirth up until 150 years ago. And when they come in, their objective is to manage your labor. That's a masculine trait. They're trying to control and manage your labor and reduce risk, which, yes, we need obstetricians in the case of emergencies. But if in 99% of pregnancies and births that are physiologically unfolding normally, that energy is actually going to sabotage your birth experience. So that's why I encourage... Yeah.
Sorry, would you say that a husband in a birth setting versus a removed, just general male have very different approaches in a birth room?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm not talking about husbands and birth partners. I think I love masculine support. And that's very different than a man coming in, or a woman. So female OBs are just as bad at this, because it's in their training to manage. And that's what they're not bad people. There are some amazing OBs out there. And I'm not saying like everything in the medical system is bad. You need to understand that birth is a business. And when they go to school, they are trained to assess risk. They are trained as surgeons. They are trained to manage you. And they will view every woman as a high risk pregnancy. And that is only going to create fear and anxiety in your heart. And you don't need to be managed. Your body is growing this baby and your intuition is turning on. And the best thing you can do is dive into physiological birth, find a community of sisters and midwives and mothers who aren't afraid of birth, who have given birth, who know how normal and natural process this is. Start taking classes, reading books, read Ina May Gaskin, Consider taking a pregnancy course that focuses on physiological birth, like my pain-free birth course, or wherever you feel aligned, that's going to actually build your faith and help you overcome the fears you have of birth and begin to lean into the supernatural beauty and sacredness of childbirth. So it really requires this radical shift in your mindset. And that's the work of pregnancy, that is the preparation. And there's lots of great stuff you can do to prepare your body, to work out, to stay healthy, to eat healthy. I believe in all of that. But the best work you can do is inside, from the inside out. That is the work. And you ask, how do we prepare? We get rid of the fear. We say, that sucks. This is what I would say. This is just my little mantra that I used. And if you wanted to steal it, great, go for it. I would just say, when I'd hear this fear and these stories, I'd say that sucks for you. And it really does. I'm empathizing. I wouldn't say it out loud. Don't say this out loud. Right. I would just say in my heart, when they're dumping their fear on me, and it's so hard not to receive it and let it land. And I'd just say, that sucks for you, but that's not for me. Yeah. And that was it. It would just roll off of me like Vaseline. Because most of you, especially if you haven't given birth yourself yet, you are carrying around other people's birth stories. They're not even yours. You don't have to carry anybody's birth story, and you get to write your own birth story. You get to create and design the birth you want with Jesus. Let's start aligning our heart with that and allow God to give us the desires of our heart, and receiving our child, receiving this process, leaning into this motherhood journey, allowing our intuition to kick on, because so much of this can't really be explained with words and checklists and test results. It's such an intuitive, flowing feminine journey, and it's emotional and it's scary and it confronts us, and we confront all our inadequacies and all our fears and all our I don't know if I can do this, right? I'm sure you've processed through a lot of those things. And what I love about you is that on this podcast, if I feel like you just celebrate womanhood and you celebrate motherhood. And that is such a beautiful thing to witness. And that's what I love to impart to women, is that we can celebrate this journey, right? I love that you bring just this beautiful, soft, feminine perspective of hey guys, we can embrace marriage and motherhood and femininity, and it can be a beautiful thing. And so I think you do a beautiful job of that. And I feel like this just comes right into alignment with your core message of celebrating women.
Oh, Karen, thank you so much. That really touches me. And I'm glad that transpires through the conversations, because I do. And I want to clarify too, Karen did say that sucks for you, but she wouldn't say that to anyone. And we're, the OBGYN is not the villain here. The people that told you the birth story are not the villain. But it is as Karen said in the beginning, how are we renewing our mind? And I even think, especially now carrying a little girl, what are we stewarding for our daughters, for our friends, for the next generation? Does it get to end with us and start something new? And I think that's the beautiful power that we have here, and that we do have as women, is we're gonna show that there is a different narrative. Karen's 11 years in, I'm gonna keep showing this. I'm gonna keep fighting to tell women, hey, they're capable. This is beautiful. God's with you in this. This is not a punishment. And yeah. I would just say, if anyone too, my imparting wisdom, having younger sisters, I think both of my sisters just gave birth within the last year. They're much younger than me. And it was so fun to get to empower them and even challenge them on some things that maybe the hospitals were telling them, and get to even pray into some negative reports they had that were overturned, one by the blood of Jesus, but also by, there's this innate power where I was hey, this is your baby. We're going to believe that he's healthy. We're going to believe that she's going to come on the right timing. We're going to believe your body's capable. And those are the stories that I want to get to share to women that are expecting or not expecting. And we do have a great healthcare system, but let that be.
I'm so thankful. Yeah, I'm so thankful we live in a modern country that can do a cesarean in 2 minutes, get you in the OR in the case of an emergency. I'm so grateful. We don't live in Africa, a third world country where maternity care outcomes are not great. At the same time, there's the over-medicalization of healthcare in our country, and that's typically what's causing a lot of interventions. And you have to guard your heart and make sure you're the one being informed and making educated choices, because unfortunately there is that over-intervention that happens very often. And so you just have to be smart.
Giving those higher percentages, again, as we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, I know the cesarean rate in America is so much higher, not because we don't have access to the medical care we need, but because maybe we have too much access.
We have we have too much.
I want to challenge the woman that was like me and was like, okay, well, I have to get an epidural for this to happen. Why don't you let God, if he tells you, hey, I want you to do it in this setting, in this way, with this mindset, we even get the benefit of going, okay, and if something happens, we will still be taken care of, but I'm going to choose this route. And my midwife, like I'm praying that she's there for this birth again, because if I was in a different setting, I would have had a different birth outcome. But I went from the last time I was checked was at that 6 centimeters. I found that flow. I stood up and I just looked at her and I said, he's coming. And even as I said it, I was like, what am I talking about? I don't know when he's coming. I was just checked at 6 centimeters.
But you knew. That's that feminine intuition.
Yes. And the way she wasn't like, I don't know. She was like, amazing, let's check you. And she's like, yep, he's crowning. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening here?
Yes. And that
that
is a whole,
intuition.
and you didn't, I love that you didn't force it before that moment. And that's what they happens in the hospitals, is that we tell women, okay, now it's time to push. If you have to be told when it's time to push, it's not time to push. That's a whole soapbox I could go on, but you know, and you can feel that baby's head coming. If you can't feel that baby coming and you don't have that realization like you had, like, okay, he's coming. It's not time to push. But what happens when we do that is we immediately disconnect women from their intuition. And then they're in a managed state of care, not an intuitive, spirit-led childbirth.
Which your body isn't doing what it's designed to do. And I will say my son's head was in the 98th percentile, so maybe I was like, oh, there's something happening here. But,
hard to miss that.
Yeah, that feels different. But I again, you've shared so much that I'm even gleaning for with this pregnancy. I know other women are going to take into account, and I love that you offer a conversation to start with anyone that's interested, and you provide deeper ways to learn and to do even coaching. But you have a free partners cheat sheet, which is, I think it's one, as women, we don't have enough information, but partners especially are like, what do I do besides not pass out? So I'm going to link that in the show notes. Your account is called Pain Free Birth. How else can women connect with you if they want to learn more or they want to work with you specifically to help overcoming some of those fears?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you can always find me at Pain Free Birth on Instagram, or painfreebirth.com is my website. And I'm actually just now getting ready to release my masterclass called 3 Keys to a Pain-Free Birth, which is totally free. It's like a 60-minute really like a fire hose kind of teaching and training on 3 of the top keys to have a pain-free birth, where I share and give you real breathing techniques. And I actually show you in real time, like, how your brain will literally block pain. It's really fun and exciting. And so a lot of women have taken that one masterclass and had pain-free births, and they'll email me about it and DM me about it later. And so that should be available probably by the time this comes out. I'll send you the link for that for anyone who's interested and wants to sign up. And then for those interested in my full pain-free birth course, that's like, if you're pregnant and ready to really prepare for birth and learn what you need to know and commit to, this is a mindset. I'm ready to make this mindset shift. I'm ready to do this with God. I'm ready to learn about my physiology and my hormones and learn the breathing techniques and learn how to push and really take back my power. You can find that on painfreebirth.com. And I just want every woman to be resourced with the knowledge of how brilliantly their body is designed for birth, and be able to walk through it confidently with God and with their partner, and know that they have what it takes. Their body knows exactly what to do, and be able to partner with that.
When we seek the Lord and we ask Him to give us wisdom, we give us healing, give us perspective, I believe that He always answers according to His will. So if you have had bad relationships and you want to learn how to date well. You haven't seen marriage modeled well, but you want to have a lasting marriage. You've been scared of birth, but you want to have a redemptive birth story. I pray that God meets you there. I believe that when we partner with Him, we will see outcomes greater than what we have previously seen. I'm so glad you tuned in today. I'm so proud of you for making it fully through the episode. And what I ask now is that you will subscribe, like, rate, or review so we can keep these episodes going, or share with a friend who you think might also enjoy this content. Until next time.